Welcome to One Rake at a Time. I'm your host, Art Jones, and today I have with me Michael Burns as my guest. And Michael Burns is the president of the Manatee Eco-Tourism Association. And he has a lot of other initials and things off at the end of his name too, and I'll just let him explain those to you.
I'm captain certified by the United States Coast Guard, dive safety officer with the American Academy of Underwater Scientists, a diver medical technician, and an EMT.
Excellent, excellent. And you're out on the water in Kings Bay almost every day, aren't you?
5 or 6 days a week, taking manatee tourists and introducing them to our manatees here, yes.
Exactly. So you actually get in the water with the people, don't you? And you're diving with them every day.
Twice a day.
And one of the reasons you get in the water with them is to make sure that they don't cross the line when they're trying to pet a manatee or enjoy an experience with a manatee and all that. Can you explain to our audience a little bit about the guidelines that you talk about with your...
Well, about 2.5 years ago, roughly half the dive shops and tour companies in the area, and one kayak company, heads up to Mary Morgan over at Crystal River Kayak, we all got together to make sure that we were actually going above and beyond the minimum requirements of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service.
Excellent.
And so we ratified some bylaws, and we have a set of guidelines. We believe in passive observation, and we allow passive interaction, which means that we wait for the manatee to come up to us when we're introducing the guests to the manatees. And we voluntarily, we've decided that no interaction will occur below the surface of the water. The manatee comes up to us, one open hand at the surface of the water, so that nobody could even think anybody was trying to hold, ride, restrict, or restrain the animal in any way.
Mm-hmm. And that's working out pretty good, isn't it? Your passengers you take out there have a pretty good experience when they run into manatees?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's made us, a world-class tourist destination. Just today, I've had 3 different parties on my boat talk about the wonderful exposure we got in the National Geographic magazine in April. And we're getting a lot of recognition for that too. You talk to law enforcement, you talk to Manatee Watch volunteers. The incident and the severity of harassment is definitely on a decrease. Much of that is being attributed to the Manatee Eco-Tourism Association, what we call META.
Well, good job. And manatees are in the increase too, aren't they?
Manatees are on a statistically significant increase. Now, this year, the southern part of the state has lost a significant amount, a record amount, to the Red Tide event down in Lee and Collier County, around the Naples and Fort Myers area. But some of the statistics that we look at for our area, and if you look at it statewide, manatee population levels, according to Dr. Bob Bondi of the USGS, who monitors that, and Dr. Jim Valade of U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we're on a statistically significant increase, and the Citrus County area has the largest, strongest, healthiest population of manatees in the state. That's according to Dr. Bob Bondi. Yep. And we have the second fastest rate of population increase. So you start with the largest base population, and we have the second fastest rate of population increase.
Well, fantastic. So the gem of the Nature Coast is continuing to shine.
Absolutely.
And our program is One Rake at a Time, and we're out there, we're trying to rake up the Lyngbya and make it a little bit better for the kids in the swimming area, increase fish habitat, and along with that also increase manatee habitat. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Mike, was what do you actually see underwater there? When you're diving there, and what do you see as far as Lyngbya and native vegetation and things like that?
There are areas of the bay that have very, very thick Lyngbya mats, and it's very hard for some of the native vegetation and even the beneficial exotic vegetation to reproduce and conduct photosynthesis when they're trying to compete with this invasive nuisance cyanobacteria, which crowds them out of living space.
Yeah, there we are taking some out of the water right there. It looks like pretty horrible stuff. Have you ever seen manatees try to eat Lyngbya?
I have, because manatees are very, very curious animals, and it tends to bind them up. I've even,
bind them up, huh? What does that mean?
At the risk of being gross, I've seen undigested Lyngbya kind of streaming and filamentously strung out of their anus, just trying to pass through undigested
really?
and kind of
That'd be a pretty unpleasant experience.
yeah.
So I would think that type of Olympia is harassing their internal systems, isn't it?
Well, it can't be good.
It can't be good.
It can't be
no,
good.
It's probably very unhealthy for them. I've heard that many times. Lyngbya or manatees, because the Lyngbya is crowding out all the foods in Kings Bay, that they're tracked going all the way out the river to eat.
Absolutely. Well, and they some of the prime grazing areas are at the mouth of the river and along the river run, but there's a lot of good pastures for them to eat generally, particularly in the Hunter's Spring Run, around Buzzard Island on the west side of the bay, what we refer to as the grasslands over in the far west. And so, if there was more native vegetation or even beneficial exotics for them to eat, more of them would stay and enjoy the protection of the slow, protected waters and keep from boats.
Yeah, because their food source really has diminished, hasn't it?
Well, speculatively, I'd say, yeah, it has. I mean, I can't speak to the science of, how quantitatively it has, but it just intuitively it has to have diminished somewhat because it's being.
Well, we certainly see it when we're raking Lyngbya. We don't find anything but Lyngbya out of those benthic mats.
One thing I can say, in areas where, particularly in between an area we call Jurassic Spring and Hunter's Spring, where you guys have worked, where I've helped you work, I have seen that some of the beneficial exotics and even some, not much, but some beneficial natives are starting to sprig out where the areas have been cleared out and where now there's light and a chance for them to do so. So anecdotally, once again, no science behind it, but as someone who's got a science background and who swims and is paid to look at manatees every day, I definitely see some good positive progress in the Hunter's Spring Run.
Well, absolutely, and of course, and it should be pointed out that when we're doing scientific study, quite often the difference between anecdotal evidence and scientific is just whether somebody wrote it down in a notebook or not. Isn't that correct?
Yeah,
observations.
to an extent.
You come out, you do a
it'd be
survey,
nice to get out there and do a quadrant.
And maybe you
actually
count them a little bit or something, but it's either there or it's not. And we certainly have found that it just makes sense once you get that deep benthic mat out of the way, because when those mats are rotting on the bottom, I mean, there's methane gas in there. I mean, that's just...
There is, absolutely.
So plants aren't going to grow in that.
Absolutely.
So we're working real hard to get that out of there, and I'm glad you've noticed it. And we're going to be talking about a little bit more about Lyngbya when we come back, and I'm going to ask you if any of the tourists actually comment about Lyngbya and when they get out of their boats and step in it and what they think about it. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with One Rake at a Time. One Rake at a Time. I'm your host, Art Jones, and my guest today is Michael Burns. And we were just talking about Lyngbya, and do tourists comment about Lyngbya? Because I've noticed that as we're cleaning it, quite often they'll say, "What is that stuff? Where did it come from?" and things like that. And I've had people say that it's no fun when you step off a boat into Lyngbya. And I was just wondering, since you're dealing with a lot of our visitors here in Kings Bay, what's the general comments or some of the comments you hear from the tourists?
Well, they have to be educated as to what they're looking at, first of all. And ideally, we're trying not to stir up the bottom. So one of the big things that we're doing is trying to keep their feet up off the bottom, and hopefully they're not actually stepping into it. But where it's been floating around, and there's quite a bit of it that, leaves the bottom and starts floating up, gets into the mask, particularly, once again, in the Hunter's Spring Run, because it floats up in there quite often.
Yeah.
And you have this slimy mess that's in somebody's hair when they get back up on the boat, or covers their mask, or always seems to drift in front of the camera at the most inappropriate time, and the autofocus focuses in on that instead of the manatee. So it is a nuisance, and it definitely detracts from their overall experience.
Yeah, I thought so. I noticed that as we were cleaning some of the areas over there by Jurassic Springs and House Springs and stuff, we were able to clear out a nice area so people could get out of their boats and step sort of onto the sandy soil. And as we cleaned out that area, and every time there was like a super low tide and there just happened to not be any boats over there, we'd go over there and pick some up, kind of doing you guys a favor so that you've got a clean spot to get out of their boat.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, If you look at the bay bottom and you want to look at it very, very carefully, once again, we're trying to float up what we do on the manatee boats. We're trying to get them off the ladder and get them floating. And yeah, they do step off and stir up a lot. But the whole idea is to get a very clear, pristine experience. And if you look at what the Tourist Development Council, some of the questionnaires, clear water is definitely at a premium. Now, I've been out with you with the one rake, and we've uncovered some vents here and there, and particularly when we pulled the carpet up out of that one section, and a vent actually opened up, and you had a little bit more clear water coming up there. And that's wonderful. One of the things that I see as a benefit as somebody who is in the water with the tourists all the time, if we can open up more clear water areas, we can disperse a little bit of the diver congestion around and a little bit of the boat congestion. We don't have to be all huddled up to the same 2 or 3 Clearwater Springs looking at the same manatees. And the other thing is it will directly benefit the manatees because those warm water vents in the winter are absolutely critical to their survival. So as we uncover some of these vents from their benthic mats and allow the springs to flow, it creates better sources of warm water for the manatees, and that translates into better habitat and better survivability through the winter.
Yeah, and look at on the screen there we are cleaning it out. Pretty horrible stuff. And I mean, that's an interesting point, Mike. How many clean spots are there out there in Kings Bay where the tourists like to gather? I know you have Jurassic and House
There's
Springs.
Jurassic, House Spring only at high tide.
Only at high tide.
King Spring only at low tide.
King Spring at low tide.
And then you have Three Sisters Springs and Three Sisters and Jurassic. I mean, you know, so you're really only looking at about 4 or 5 spots in the bay.
That's what I thought. That was one of the reasons we wanted to target the Hunter Springs Basin, because we felt that there was a real need to have another clean area in Kings Bay to sort of take the pressure off of Three Sisters.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you know, I can see it helping. I can see that the freshwater flow is increasing the clarity, especially if you can. You know, nothing we can do about a good rain event, but after a few good rain events, you can definitely see the flows and the water clarity increase. You know, another component we're going to need to adjust county-wide is we're going to have to get people to stop using phosphates in their fertilizers. Mm-hmm. And as these phosphates leach in, even in the interior portions of the county, as they leach into the spring vents, about 95% of the nutrification comes from the spring flow itself. So if every waterfront owner had got off septic tomorrow and got onto the city water, it still wouldn't do much about the nutrification problem. And the nutrification is the fuel, is the food for this Lingvia and something else, a diatomic algae that blooms in the summer that makes that pea green water that we all hate to swim in. Everybody wants clear
water.
Those
are those little tiny microscopic algae that you can't really see it except for under a microscope, but it will make the water pea green.
Pea green.
Those are called diatoms, and also known as phytoplankton.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's coming from just the nutrients in the water itself.
I've seen several studies about it, and everybody wants to point to nitrification, which is the nitrites in the fertilizers mainly, and it also comes from septic and human waste products. But a lot of evidence is pointing to the fact that phosphates in the fertilizers are creating a better environment for that pea green, for that phytoplankton, for that pea green diatom.
Yeah,
so
you're right, yeah.
If we could just, I mean, it's a very, very easy thing too. If we could get our brethren on the east side of the county, particularly where the spring recharge actually is, if we could get them to abandon phosphates in their fertilizers, like, you know, years ago back in the 60s and 70s, the whole push was to get rid of the phosphates in our detergents. Now we need to get rid of the phosphates in our fertilizers as well. And
why do they have phosphates in their fertilizer?
You know, I'm not exactly sure why. I'm not a botanist.
Isn't that for root growth? I know nitrogen is there so that the grass will be green.
Right, and there's a lot of nitrogen fixers that, you know, it aids in the growth of the plant, in quick growth of the plant, actually. You know, a lot of the miracle grows and the things that get things growing really fast, really strong. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't really researched it.
When you look at a bag of fertilizer, it's got usually 3 numbers on it. It's got your nitrogen, your phosphates, and your potash in there. And so we know the nitrogen's for green, and I believe the phosphates is to promote healthy, strong root growth.
Okay. If you say so, that's beyond
I believe that's so. We'll have to check up on that and talk
that's beyond my realm of expertise. But I'll tell you, for a clean waterway, we want to start getting away from the phosphates and getting that out of our springs. And who knows, we're drinking that. You know, we're showering, and it's going into our springs, it's going into our wells. So we're drinking it and we're showering in it as well.
Right, and I've talked to people. I was a guest speaker over there at Too Far on the lakeside over by Inverness, and they agree. They know that the lake water is basically our spring water later. So it's all sort of interconnected. And we were talking to them about bringing some of the One Rake at a Time program over there because they're having trouble with their lakes over there too. The same thing. Not only do the phosphates come out in our springs, but it's in their lakes first.
Right.
So it's a county-wide problem.
And the Lyngbya is being transferred from one waterway to another on the boats and the kayaks. You know, interestingly enough, dry Arizona, which has an abundance of lakes, you'd be surprised, in the Colorado River, and they have a huge program. You cannot trailer your boat into a lake in Arizona.
That's probably a great idea. Yeah, we need to do that here, and we're going to be talking about that more on One Rake at a Time. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back for another section. You hear the music playing. Welcome back to One Rake at a Time. I'm your host, Art Jones, and today our guest is Michael Burns. And we were just talking about Lyngbya and phosphates and things like that, and everybody participating countywide to help clean up the water, because it really is a man-made problem that we're facing in our waters. And during the break, Michael, you were just telling me about a John Audubon quote, and I wrote that down. And could you repeat that again for the audience, please?
Well, you know, one of the things that I do in my daily life here is I introduce people to the manatees. People come from all over the world to meet our manatees. That's the main attraction here in Citrus County. And John Audubon is famous for a quote, you know, one of the famous conservationists in the world, talking about, you only protect what you love, and you only love what you know.
Exactly. And so by getting people out here and see what's going on, that really makes a big difference. We've noticed that when we do the cleanups, the educational component is just natural. People are cleaning it up out of the water, and they're like, well, yeah, it's nasty stuff and everything, and we're taking it out of there and we're flipping it in the kayaks and everything, but where does it come from? And you just get natural conversations in the water, and it's amazing how this person will know a little bit about that, and that person will know a little bit about that, and next thing you know, they're saying, well, you know what, Art, after we've been cleaning it up, I'm not even going to bother to fertilize my lawn anymore. I'm going to just stop using it. And I said, you know, that probably would be a wonderful thing.
One lawn at a time.
One lawn at a time, exactly. And saving 1 gallon of water at a time, because as we're talking about our spring flow coming out and the diminishing aquifer, one of my pet peeves is losing water to evaporation. I'll go by somebody and they've got their sprinklers on in the middle of the day, and 90% of the water is just going up in evaporation, never to return to Florida. So that's one of the worst things you can do, is water during the day. So drip irrigation and non-spray irrigation methods, so you're also saving Kings Bay. Saving 1 gallon at a time, switching one spray irrigation to drip irrigation at a time.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of a three-prong approach. We need to use one less bag of fertilizer at a time, save 1 gallon of water at a time, and rake one rake full of Lyngbya out of the water at a time.
Absolutely. Florida-friendly lawns, our friends at University of Florida have all kinds of classes about, native, attractive vegetation that's, drought-resistant, xeriscaping. You know, I grew up in Southern California, and in the 70s and 80s, water has always been a major issue for us.
Precious, right, and we're heading that way in Florida, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and it's mainly due to population pressure.
Absolutely.
You know, back when there was only 1 or 2 million people living in Florida, it probably wasn't too much of an issue for our grandparents when they moved here, and they kind of got the tradition going of these beautiful green lawns, thinking that that's what everybody needed to do. But now that we've got, what is it, 16 or 18 million people living in Florida?
Yep.
If everyone has a green lawn, we'll all be drinking salt water, won't we?
We'll be drinking salt water, and we'll be showering in our own fertilizer.
Yeah, that's no fun at all, is it?
And if you look at it too, I mean, if you look at the aquifer as a garden hose, and you stick, every well is a pinprick.
Yeah.
And every time you put a well in, a few little pinpricks aren't going to change the flow of the hose. But you start putting a bunch of little pinpricks into the hose, and all of a sudden you have diminished flow. Now, the diminished flow on a garden hose is a good example, but you know, one of the things I look at as a diver here in Kings Bay, you go down to the mouth of the cavern at Kings Spring, and there are barnacles there on the mouth of the cavern for the first time. Talk about saltwater intrusion, because now the salt water can come in where the fresh water used to push it out. And you have a saltwater intrusion there for the first time. You have waterfront homeowners that are having saltwater intrusion into their wells. They're going to need to be on a city water or desalinization for the first time in history. And then if we want to look at the writing on the wall, just look north at Cedar Key and look at what's happening with their water up there.
That's absolutely scary. I know when you get salt water into a freshwater well, it pretty much poisons the well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And even though you may have some heavy rains and you may be able to get some fresh water in there again, the fact that you had salt in there at one time is pretty much leaving that well poisoned, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah. I'm not a professional hydrologist, but that would be my guess.
Pretty
on
much,
it. Yeah.
because it, you know the way salt is.
Yeah.
Once it gets in there, it's not easy to get rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great that we talk about these issues on this show, because everybody watching it, you know, people ask me so many times, how can we help? And it's just use your common sense. You know, let's not waste what we have. You know, why waste our water? Why let it evaporate? And I've had a few people say to me, well, Art, you know, since they put in that, they're letting them drill that well in Crystal River and they're going to bottle water, so why should I conserve? You know, that's wrong for them to give them the permit. And I say, yes, that was wrong for them to give them that permit. But two wrongs don't make a right. Absolutely. So if they're wasting water, that doesn't mean we should waste water. It's just not a good thing. That's a downward spiral or spiral. So we really have to go above that. And you know, they say two wrongs don't make a right. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And you know, one of my favorite quotes.
Permits usually have time expiration dates on them too. Talk to your state legislators. Get vocal, get active about it.
Right. You know? Change the rules, because really, you can't really blame the Southwest Florida Water Management District, because they had to follow those rules. Those rules were created by politicians up in Tallahassee. So really, that's how people can help at home, is write to your legislatures. You know, stay active, write letters to the editor, make your voice heard.
Jimmy Smith on this on the House of Representatives side, and Senator Charles Dean on the state Senate side. Let your state legislators know. Right. You know, they can't represent you.
Governor Rick Scott?
Governor Rick Scott. Your representatives can't represent you unless they know you're well.
Right. So then maybe ask them to modify the rules that the water management districts have, so that everybody that applies for the permit doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it. Right. Because really, that's our city water there that they're taking out. So I have to pay city rates when I take water out. So. And they're not having to pay city rates. They don't even have a meter on it. Right. So I can see why people get upset. But like I say, two wrongs don't make a right. That's no excuse for us to be wasteful on ourselves. And I see we're running out of time there. So I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in again. And I think that next month we're going to do another location shot out on the water. We're going to go out there and take another tour of the water. So make sure you tune in next month too. And we've got more great things coming up. So thanks for being with us, and thank you for being my guest on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Art.
All right. And we'll see you soon. Art Jones for One Rake at a Time, signing off.